The boss fight. Isn't mandatory, but they have become the norm. So how comes over a decade later, 2 generation jumps, I keep using the same boss fight for the sake of reference? The boss fight was created in 1975 by Gary Whisenhunt and Ray Wood, who felt that their D&D fan-made game and the Plato system needed a climax. Although very simple in its structure, its importance has only grown with the possibilities and the now available hardware. Even though that is the case, the boss fight's purpose has remained the same. A climax, but it has morphed into more. In fact, it has morphed into our personal test. They are a reflection of our skill. They are built for a moment of victory, and depending on their difficulty, they will for sure make us remember mechanics that maybe have slipped out of our minds since the tutorial. Although that sounds like a fairly straightforward process, having to create a singular moment that aligns with the game's rules doesn't always equal the perfect outcome. You see, a boss fight is one section, but a game is an entire journey. When boss fights are created, they are now a subconscious norm that rarely receive the treatment of being the overall priority from the jump, as starting at the finish line and working backwards is beyond counterintuitive. So their existence can get lost in terms of context, placement, or possibilities. But what separates a mediocre boss fight and a fantastic one?
Me. I am the great mighty Pooh, and I'm going to throw my shit at you.
Rule number 1. Great arena with level design that directly affects the fight. Rule number 2. Crack down on the idea of being able to separate repetition through the boss. Rule number 3. Prioritize mechanics that may not have had the opportunity to shine through the previous mission's pacing. Rule number 4. Build up to its tone far before the moment. Rule number 5. Unpredictability. Rule number 6. Raise the challenge. Rule number 7. Have a payoff that feels like it is worth our time. 7 rules. 7 rules to adapt from what is created before you even consider chipping away a part of the scope of your world to cater towards the boss fight to create a mirage of uniqueness. The boss fight needs to feel different yet coexist within the game's solidified rules. The boss fight needs to be a step up in challenge, and the boss fight needs to be an example of change. So why do some of them fail? Personally, I find the balance between the payoff and what we will receive after the boss fights tends to be prioritized and overshadows what is actually important. Let me use an example that is pretty close to Arkham City. When I think about the Joker Titan boss fight in Arkham Asylum, this sigh of disappointment splurges out of my mouth because of what it could have been. Let me save you some time. Rule number 1, it's just an octagon with an electric fence. Rule number 2, it follows the rule of 3 and you don't really fight the Joker at all. Rule number 3, nope. Rule number 4, yes. Rule number 5, unpredictably dog shit. Rule number 6, I didn't even get touched on hard. Not really a sentence I ever want to repeat again. Rule number 7, sure. In Arkham Asylum, each boss had their own tailor-made battle that ticked those boxes, yet the main boss fight that has been building from the moment we locked eyes on the entrance of the asylum's doors didn't, because the payoff was treated to be far more important in comparison to the fight that stood before it. Let me present to you the Dave play. A completely unique beast I witnessed with my own eyes, and I want to stress this. Dave is a real person.
I am a real person.
I am not senile, this gameplay is sincere as I have way too much pride to suck this much arse. Dave happens to be a good friend of mine, who unlike me has a life that doesn't consist of a controller and an outdated console that the children of TikTok will look at it as if it's an ancient artifact. But when I heard Dave had yet to play Arkham City, which is beyond outrageous and unacceptable by my standards, I forced him to play it, as I thought it was a golden opportunity to highlight the Mr. Freeze level in the eyes of someone who is experiencing it for the first time. But as a seasoned veteran of the Arkham series, I came up with a cunning plan. I knew Dave had to try and learn 2 subsets, the free flow combat system and stealth, and I made him do this on hard. Yet again, another sentence I do not want repeated, completely setting him up for failure to make my point. What's the point? Are you paying attention to what is actually possible inside of Arkham City's mechanics? So I refused to feed him until he played up to the Mr. Freeze boss fight.
You are taking longer than I expected, Batman.
And the actual lad did it. Straight up, played Arkham City non-stop from the beginning up until the Mr. Freeze boss fight for this video. Honestly, get yourself a friend like Dave. But before Dave fights Mr. Freeze, he is completely unaware that he would have to use 8 different attacks in order to take Mr. Freeze down. But something that was completely unprepared for and unintended, Dave has a peculiar set of skills. Obliviousness, which for me is the ultimate granny proofer / playtester for my mad ideas. For me, to be honest, I'm not even too sure what game he was playing for the last 5 hours. Unless you genuinely decide to incorporate the gigantic amount of mechanics consistently up to the Mr. Freeze boss fight, you will get stuck and think to yourself, what haven't I done? In fact, at one point to directly quote Dave, it's no longer Mr. Freeze, it is Mr. Please. Which makes me ask the question, why is it such a surprise? The Batman Arkham series is a beautiful anomaly where Rocksteady included and created a bunch of gadgets to be used as the Dark Knight that already gave the level design a huge reason to be explored, and made playing as Batman fantastic. But with the difficulty in Dave just getting comfortable to the free flow combat system, ignoring the world's interactions as his purpose was just completing Arkham City as quick as possible, it's overshadowed what is to come, making the Mr. Freeze boss fight even more surprising for him. Exactly 55 minutes and 41 seconds worth of surprises. But there was this gradual build. Once Dave figured out that his knowledge of Batman Arkham City was what was holding him back instead of Mr. Freeze being this unbeatable force, with his brain slowly gathering the tools to put the equation together to defeat Mr. Freeze, one death at a time, the payoff,
well, thanks for that,
was worth it. Boss fights can be predictable, containable and easily approachable. But what if that boss adapted, made you think, gradually crossed off your possibilities, but made your skill the reasons why you can't get to the finish line? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mr. Freeze boss fight. We are used to being the ones who confront the boss, taking the action to them. But what happens when the predator becomes the prey? To summarize Mr. Freeze's abilities, he is extremely strong and does not mess around. If he sees you, you are in trouble. So his boss fight strips away Batman's beautiful combat system and forces our hand into Batman's subset that is stealth. It extends itself to use Batman's gadgets in the environment. Sounds easy, right? Well, after a successful takedown, Mr. Freeze adapts to whatever Batman throws at him, removing the possibility for the same attack to be used twice, making patience key, which is a huge reason to why Mr. Freeze is such an incredible boss. You cannot freeze on Mr. Freeze because of his constant pressure, as his pathing is directly following your movement, meaning that unless you have intentions in order to draw him towards something, he will eventually get you. When he hasn't attacked you after a period of time, he has a method to find you. When you try to eliminate those,
every action you take reveals your location.
Hiding isn't an option because that decision exposes your location. When you feel like you are one step ahead, he has an answer. Now, if that's not enough for you to justify my huge, broad and definitive statement of the Mr. Freeze boss fight being placed above over 2 decades of bosses, wait there. In my opinion, the arena is, as if not, more important than the boss themselves. The old GCPD building where the Mr. Freeze boss fight occurs is a fairly interesting piece of design, as apart from the Mr. Freeze boss fight, it is mostly redundant, only being used as an arena once prior to fighting Mr. Freeze, and never again in the main story. Yet after clearing the arena for the first time you enter it, you have the opportunity to just freely look around. The magic behind it though is that if it's your first time playing Arkham City, you wouldn't think that a brilliant boss fight is coming later on in the story, as the way the plot sets up the Mr. Freeze and Batman interaction seems fairly respectable. And even better, inside of that arena prior to Mr. Freeze, you have the chance to use the majority of the gadgets against Penguin's men that you will eventually need to use against Mr. Freeze. It sets you up perfectly, but it changes slightly. Let me break it down for you. Pre-New Game Plus, the gadgets at your disposal for the Mr. Freeze boss fight are the Line Launcher, the Bat Claw, the Smoke Pellet, the explosive gel, the remote electrical charge, the disruptor, the cryptographic sequencer, the batarang, the remote control batarang, and the sonic batarang if you decided to unlock it. Out of the 10 obtainable gadgets, only 6 have some form of use. 4 out of those 6 can do direct damage to Mr. Freeze, and 3 of those 6 are only useful for the environment. The remote electrical charge is useful for the electric generators, the explosive gel is useful for the destructible walls, the line launcher is good for kicking Mr. Freeze but can only be used if it is attached to 2 parallel walls, whilst a disruptor stops his gun from working, giving him a shock. The back claw does no damage, but it does buy you a few seconds from Mr. Freeze ending your arse. Whilst the batarang just helps these exploding things from hitting you, which as I said earlier on are a lose-lose situation. The arena itself has way more to offer than just the use of gadgets. In fact, it is mandatory. Let's say you are playing on hard. You need 8 strikes in order to finish Mr. Freeze. You have used all of your gadgets, half of your possibilities are gone. The rest of the answer lies within you needing to adapt to the arena to your advantage. You have the vents, the ledges, the glass, the electrical water, and the objects that allow you to glide if you have significant height. Something that is already fairly limited unlike the first time using stealth within the arena, as you can't use the gargoyles that become second nature within the Arkham series. And if you abuse the overpowered detective vision,
detective mode is useless as
Mr. Freeze just turns it off. The main advantage we have with Mr. Freeze is that he doesn't follow a generic path in movement or attacks that most boss fights do, as he is following you and only strikes once you are seen but sprays in the general direction of your path he is following. His rules to be beat are dependent on how you set him up, something Dave and a lot of people don't notice. The pressure he creates through relentlessly stalking your movement is his downfall, and the gadgets in the arena are pointless until you realise this, which is such a genius way to resolve the idea of pressure within game design. Mr. Freeze may be extremely powerful, but our power is whether we use our intuition, and as a player, that is the peak of our experience. And you just can't beat them. Games that throw you in at the deep end with the hopes that their design has taught you all you need to know and just let you figure it out are the best for me. No reminders, no hints, just go. And with how the Arkham series catered towards Batman's abilities, opened so many doors for a successful boss fight within the series. Admittedly, Mr. Freeze is a needle in a haystack within the Arkham series, as most of them drop the ball pretty hard. But the Mr. Freeze boss fight is just perfect in its design. I have no names to throw out towards you, so we can collectively applaud those who are a part of creating the greatest boss fight I have played to this day if you agree with me. But whoever you are, thank you for creating something legendary that lives in my mind rent-free.